Welcome to Sachin Study Tech. Today topic is logical operators. So here logical and this is logical and logical or logical not. In C or Java, so here logical and is this is the logical and you can use double ampersand, right? Here this is or and this is not. But in this case here in Python, so logical and is you can use and a and d or and not. So now we can see the example, then you can understand what is logical and. So here it is, for example, a greater than 10 and for example 5 less than 20 here. You can see, for example, here a equal to 25, right? If you can see, if a greater than 10 which is true, 25 greater than 10 which is true, so here it is true, and 5 less than 20 which is also true, so here you can use the and, that means both are true, it is true. Okay, now you can see, for example, in the truth tables also, for example, p q, for example I am taking true and true false true, right? Here it is false. For example, you can use the p and q in this case. Okay, both are true, then only it is true. Okay, remaining if any one of the false, it is false, right? Which is false. Now you can use the p r q. In this case p r q, okay, any one of the one of the expression is true, then the resultant is true. So here it is true, here it is true, here it is true. So here both are false, that's why here it is false. This is R. Okay, what is not? Not means here, for example, here it is true. Okay, you can use the not here. Here it is not, right? Here not true. That means not true means here it is false. You can return the false. Okay, for example, not false, it return true. So this is the logical operators. Now we can see the example, then you can understand. So here it is, for example, a equal to 5, b equal to 20. Then for example here it is print a less than 10 and b greater than, for example, here it is 8. In this case you can see, so a less than 10, that means 5 less than 10, so it is true. Then you can compare the second one. If first one is false, need not to compare the second one, it cannot evaluated, right? Here logical and, so that means the first expression is true, then you can evaluate the second one. If first one is false, okay, it need not evaluated on the second expression. So here the first one is 5 less than 10 which is true, then you can evaluate it here. B 20 greater than 8, so which is also true, so the result is true. Now you can see the result is true. For example, here I am using a greater than 10, that is 5 greater than 10, so which is false. Okay, need not evaluated this one in AND case. So now we can see the false. For example, in you can use the R, right? You can use the R. In this case, if first one is true, need not evaluated the second one. Okay, for example, here in this case I am taking a less than 10, the relational operator a less than 10, that means 5 less than 10 which is true, then need not evaluated the second one in this case. Okay, just which is true, you can print here which is true. For example, here it is a greater than 10, that means 5 greater than 10, here which is false, then you can evaluate the second one. In this case only you can evaluate the second one. So which is b greater than 8, so which is true, so the result is true, right? So for example, here the total result is true, right? For example, I am using not here, I am using not. In this case you can see what is the total expression here, a greater than 10, so that means 5 greater than 10, which is false. Or next, b greater than 8, so which is true. 20 greater than 8, which is true. So the total expression will return true. Now we can use the not, that means which is false, you can return false. Here you can see which is false. Okay, so simply can see, simply here which is true, not true means, not true means that is false, right? For example, here false, that means which is true. Okay, this is the logical operators and or not. So where you can use the logical operator. Okay, next you can see the some example programs, then you can understand the logical operator. So logical operator basically, here you can see for example, here if you want to print, right, if you can print, so here it is false, false and true and false. For example, in this case, so first is false, so need not evaluate the remaining expressions, right? Directly it can return the false, directly it can return the false. For example, here in this case you can see, here it is for example true, right? Here it is true and here it is false, false, and here which is true, right? In this case you can see which is true, then you can evaluate the next one, which is false, need not to evaluate this one. So maybe which is true, but it cannot evaluate it, directly it can return false in this case. But in case of r, in case of r, that means here print, here it is true, or for example here which is false. In this case the first one is true, so need not evaluate this one, so directly it can return true in this case. And also for example, if you can see that print, here it is false, or here it, which is also false. This case you can see first is false, then r is there, so you can evaluate the next one, next one is also false, then result is false here. For example, in this case you can see false or true, false or true. In this case first one is false, so you can evaluate the next one is true, so the result is true. Okay, so this is the logical and or not, right? For example, you know, the simple thing is, for example, if you want to print, okay, if you want to print not, here have the true, not true means which returns false, right? For example, print not false, so you can return the reverse, here it is false, so it's return true. So this is the logical and or not. For example, you can see the one example program here. I am taking a equal to 5 and b equal to for example 6. If you want to find out the minimum element here, just if you want to find out the minimum element, and also you can see in C language here I am using a less than for example here a and b. So what is the meaning of a and b? Here 5 and 6, so what it returns, here you can see, just if you want to print C, what is the output here, you can see which is 6. What is the meaning of and, logical and? Here logical and 5 and 6, the value is 6, right? For example, here using r, here what is the value of, here can return the first value. So what is meant by first value can return, here what is the meant by can return the second value, right? You can see for example, you can see the not here, not a, so what is the value here, which is false. A means true, that means any value, okay, that means any value which is true, so the value you can take the 0 here, for example. So what is meant by here, you can see which is a means that is 0, so that is false, not a means which is true, right? Okay, for example, in this case I am using, now you can see that A and B, in this case you can see 0 means, okay, 0 means 0 indicates the false, right? So now we can see A and B, so which is written 0. Okay, here I am using and, that means the first one is false, that means 0 indicates the false, right? So which written directly 0. For example, first one is, for example, here not 0, then you can take any value. I am taking 8, then in this case it can return the B value. Here it can return the B value, but in this case you can see I'm using R. Here A is 8, so need not evaluate the second one, then directly it can return that A value. Here you can see in this case it can return A value. For example, here in this case A value is 0, A or B, then here it is false, then you can evaluate the next one. That's why if it can return 6. Here you can see that. So this is the logic. So if you can use and or not, like, so you can see that here also I am using true and for example false, and here it is true. So the total is, I am using and, the total is false, right? You can see the false. For example, instead of and I am using R here, R, here also R. So what is the value here? Here also R. What is the value? So which is true, right? For example, in this case I am using and, true is there, true and true, true and true. Here true, that means I am using here, it is a false, right? So false are true and true. So what is the value here? You can see which is true, that means true and true, so both are true, then true. So here false are which is true, so you can return true, right? In combinations also you can use R and, okay, for example here you can use and, I'm using not. For example, I'm using not, here it is false, right? I'm using false, so you can see that. What is the meaning here? Which is not false means true, so true and true and true, so which is true, then here I'm using R. Now we can see what is the total expression here, which is true, right? So these are the logical and or not. Thank you for watching. Please like, subscribe and click the bell icon for the latest notifications.